Here is the English translation with American names and locations, maintaining the original length. Michael Carter adjusted his worn cap over his graying hair as he walked through the private hangar at LaGuardia Airport in New York. His simple clothes, a faded t-shirt, grease-stained jeans, and worn work boots, contrasted starkly with the luxurious surroundings. He had just spent the morning helping renovate a school in the Bronx, as he often did, not minding getting his hands dirty. At 55, the American billionaire had a life philosophy many considered eccentric. Despite his fortune estimated in billions of dollars, he preferred to maintain a modest lifestyle and dedicate his time and resources to social projects. His technology company, Carter Innovations, was a leader in sustainable solutions, but he rarely appeared at corporate events or elite social gatherings. "Mr. Carter, your documents, please," politely requested Sarah, his personal assistant for over a decade. She was one of the few people who truly knew the boss beyond his unpretentious appearance. "Thank you, Sarah," he replied, tucking the papers into his back pocket. "The school project turned out excellent. Those children deserve a dignified place to study." Sarah smiled, once again admiring her boss's simplicity. "You could have just made a donation like most businessmen would, and missed the chance to see the joy in those little ones' eyes." "Impossible." Michael laughed as they headed to the boarding area of the private terminal. The contrast between his appearance and the environment became even more evident when they entered the luxurious aircraft. The other passengers, executives in impeccable suits and socialites dripping with jewelry, cast disapproving glances as they saw him. "Look at that," whispered an elegant lady to her seatmate. "How did they let someone like that onto a private flight?" The malicious comments didn't go unnoticed by Michael, who maintained his usual serenity. He settled into his first-class seat while Sarah organized some documents in the seat next to him. A flight attendant approached, her cordial smile transforming into a disdainful expression upon noticing Michael's dirty clothes. "Sir, are you sure this is your seat?" "Yes, I'm sure," he calmly replied, extending his boarding pass. The attendant examined the document with visible distrust. "I'll need to verify this with the captain," she said, quickly walking away. Sarah began to stand up, indignant, but Michael stopped her with a gentle gesture. "Let it be, Sarah. Sometimes, people need to learn important lessons about judging others by appearance." Minutes later, Captain Robert Johnson, known for his rigidity and perfectionism, came down to the passenger cabin. His face showed irritation as he approached Michael's seat. "Sir," the captain said in an authoritative tone, "I received information about an irregular passenger. Could you show me your documents?" Michael remained calm, but his eyes revealed a mixture of sadness and determination. "Certainly, Captain," he responded, reaching for the documents in his pocket. Before he could hand them over, the captain brusquely interrupted him. "I don't know how you managed to get past security, but this is a private flight for select individuals. Your presence is causing discomfort to the other passengers." "Captain," Sarah intervened, "if I may—" "You may not," he cut her off. "This gentleman needs to leave immediately." The other passengers watched the scene with a mixture of satisfaction and embarrassment. Some discreetly filmed with their cell phones, while others pretended not to pay attention. "Sir," Michael insisted, his voice still serene, "if you examine my documents, you'll see that—" The captain, losing patience, grabbed Michael's arm. "Enough talk, you're getting off now." It was at this moment that Sarah stood up, her firm voice echoing through the cabin. "Captain Johnson, you are assaulting Michael Carter, the owner of this plane and CEO of Carter Innovations." A deathly silence fell over the aircraft. The passengers, who had been whispering before, were now slack-jawed. The flight attendant, who had questioned Michael earlier, turned pale, dropping the clipboard she was holding. The captain immediately released Michael's arm, his face alternating between red with shame and white with shock. "Mr. Carter, I didn't know." Michael calmly straightened his t-shirt and stood up. "Now you do, Captain. And I believe everyone here has learned a valuable lesson today." Turning to Sarah, he continued, "Please arrange our return to the terminal. I don't feel comfortable traveling in this environment." As he headed towards the exit, Michael briefly stopped next to a young flight attendant who, during all the confusion, had discreetly tried to intervene on his behalf. "What's your name, young man?" "Peter, sir," the young man nervously replied. "Thank you for your empathy, Peter. You're the kind of professional we need more of in our society." Michael smiled, leaving a card in his hands. "Contact my office tomorrow." News of the incident spread quickly across social media, generating a wave of debates about prejudice and judgments based on appearances. Michael Carter, the billionaire who preferred working on the factory floor to attending cocktail parties, had inadvertently started a movement that would change many lives. Beyond appearance, the hashtag dominated social media just 24 hours after the incident at LaGuardia Airport. Videos recorded by passengers showed different angles of the hostility faced by Michael Carter, generating a storm of indignation on social networks. At Carter Innovations headquarters, Sarah coordinated an emergency meeting with the communication team. The screens in the Situation Room displayed headlines from various news portals. Billionaire harassed for wearing simple clothes at airport. Carter Innovations CEO suffers discrimination on private flight. Prejudice in high society. The Michael Carter case. "We've already received over 200 interview requests," informed Julia, the press officer. "All major media outlets want a statement from Mr. Carter." Sarah observed through the panoramic window of the 30th floor as she absorbed the information. She knew her boss well enough to know he would transform this situation into something bigger. The phone rang. It was Michael. "Sarah, gather the foundation team. I want everyone here at my house in an hour." His voice sounded energized, as it always did when he had a new idea. In Michael's penthouse, a modern but surprisingly modest construction for someone of his position, the Carter Foundation team gathered in the office. The billionaire, still wearing the same clothes from the day before, paced back and forth, gesticulating as he spoke. "I don't want to use this to destroy careers or generate more hatred," he explained. "I want to transform this experience into something positive, something that makes people reflect on their prejudices." "Do you have any idea in mind, sir?" asked Charles, the foundation's director. Michael smiled, that smile his team knew well, the one that always preceded big projects. "We're going to launch the Beyond Appearance campaign. I want to create a movement that challenges people to rethink how they judge others." While the team discussed strategies, Peter, the young flight attendant who had shown empathy during the incident, arrived at the building. Following the instructions on the card he had received, he presented himself at the reception. "Mr. Peter," called Sarah, appearing in the lobby. "Mr. Carter is waiting for you." In the office, Michael greeted Peter with a warm hug, surprising the young man. "You demonstrated something rare yesterday, Peter. Moral courage. How many people saw what was happening and chose to stay silent?" "I just did what I thought was right, sir," Peter replied, embarrassed. "Exactly why you're here," Michael smiled. "I want you to be one of the faces of our new campaign. Your story shows that small acts of courage can make a difference." Meanwhile, on social media, a spontaneous movement began to gain traction. People shared their own stories of discrimination with the hashtag Beyond Appearance. A salesman recounted how he was poorly treated in a luxury store. A doctor reported how patients doubted her ability due to her youthful appearance. At the airline's headquarters, Captain Robert Johnson faced a tense meeting with the board. His license had been preventively suspended, and he awaited a decision about his professional future. At home, his teenage daughter refused to speak to him, embarrassed by her father's behavior that had gone viral on social media. "How could you, Dad?" were the only words she said before locking herself in her room, from where she shared messages of support for Michael Carter on her networks. The official Beyond Appearance campaign was announced at a press conference at the end of that week. Michael, wearing the same simple clothes as always, took the stage of the packed auditorium. "What happened to me is not the exception, it's the rule," he began. "Every day people are judged, discriminated against, and humiliated based on their appearance. This needs to change." The first phase of the campaign would include documentaries with real stories, lectures in schools and companies, and a series of actions on social networks. Peter, the flight attendant, would be one of the first to share his perspective of the incident. "Our society has created an obsession with appearances that distances us from our humanity," Michael continued. "When I was dirty with grease on that plane, it was because I had spent the morning helping to renovate a school. How many times do we judge without knowing the full story? The press conference ended with the announcement of a $5 million fund for projects that promoted inclusion and combated prejudice. Applications would begin the following week. That night, as Sarah organized the final details of the campaign, she received an envelope. It was a letter from Captain Robert Johnson, addressed to Michael Carter. As she read its contents, she realized that the story was far from over. Sarah handed the letter to Michael in his office at the foundation. The billionaire adjusted his reading glasses and began to read aloud. "Dear Mr. Carter, I write this letter not only to apologize, but to share a deep reflection that your example has triggered in my life. I've spent the last few days confronting painful truths about myself. I am the son of an aircraft mechanic and a seamstress. I grew up seeing my parents being treated with disdain by people who thought themselves superior. I swore I would be different, that I would earn respect. But in my quest for recognition, I became exactly what I despised. My daughter Laura, 16, hasn't spoken to me since the incident. Yesterday, I found in her diary a school project on people who inspire me. She wrote about you, about how your humility and social commitment represent everything she hopes for in her father. I don't ask for your forgiveness, Mr. Carter, as my behavior was unforgivable. I only ask for an opportunity to redeem myself, to use my experience to help others not make the same mistake. Sincerely, Robert Johnson." Michael carefully folded the letter, his eyes revealing a mixture of compassion and determination. "Sarah, schedule a meeting with Mr. Johnson and include his daughter in the invitation." The Beyond Appearance campaign was gaining international proportions. The documentary, produced with real stories of discrimination, went viral, reaching millions of views in just a few hours. Peter, the flight attendant, became a symbol of moral courage after his moving interview on 60 Minutes. At that moment, I saw in Mr. Carter my own father, who also always worked with calloused hands, Peter shared, moved. I couldn't stay silent watching someone being humiliated just for their appearance. In public and private schools, the Look Beyond project initiated debates about prejudice and empathy. In a school in New York, a teacher reported how her students spontaneously began including classmates who were previously marginalized for their differences. At Carter Innovations headquarters, Michael was receiving Robert Johnson and his daughter, Laura. The teenager, initially reluctant to come, observed everything with poorly disguised curiosity. "Laura," Michael began gently, "I read your school project. I was very touched." The girl blushed, casting a surprised look at her father. "You read it?" "Your teacher shared it with us, with your permission," Michael explained. "You wrote something very important about social transformation, beginning with small daily actions." Robert observed the interaction in silence, tears held back in his eyes. His daughter, who had barely looked at him for days, was there, discussing social change with the man he had humiliated. "Mr. Johnson," Michael continued, turning to Robert, "your letter showed me something valuable, that prejudices can be unlearned. How about we transform your experience into a tool for change?" The proposal was bold. Robert would participate in a series of lectures at companies and aviation schools, sharing his story as an example of how ingrained prejudices can blind even experienced professionals. "Dad," Laura spoke directly to Robert for the first time in days, "this is important. You always taught me that we should learn from our mistakes." Robert discreetly wiped away a tear. "Mr. Carter, I don't deserve this opportunity." "It's not about deserving," Michael replied. "It's about choosing to be part of the solution. Your story can help others recognize their own prejudices before they cause harm." Meanwhile, on social media, a new challenge was going viral. After 7 days Beyond Appearance. People from different social classes were switching roles for a week, documenting their experiences. A businessman spent a week working as a janitor in his own building. An executive accompanied recycling collectors in their routine. The Carter Foundation announced the first projects approved by the Anti-Prejudice Fund. Among them, a cooperative of seamstresses who would create school uniforms, a professional mentoring program for underprivileged youth, and a series of documentaries about professionals who challenged stereotypes in their fields. Peter, now the Foundation's training coordinator, was preparing for his first lecture. His story of courage inspired other employees to take a stand against discrimination in the workplace. The movement was growing, transcending the original story of the billionaire on the plane. It was becoming a call to action, an invitation for each person to examine their own prejudices and choose to be an agent of change. The auditorium of the Civil Aviation School was packed. Robert Johnson, wearing a simple instructor's uniform, instead of his usual captain's attire, adjusted the microphone with slightly trembling hands. In the front row, Laura smiled encouragingly at her father. "My name is Robert Johnson, and this is a story about pride and prejudice in aviation," he began, his voice gradually gaining strength. "A month ago, I was the captain who humiliated Michael Carter. Today I am a man seeking redemption." The audience, mainly composed of young, aspiring pilots and flight attendants, listened in absolute silence. Among them, Peter observed with interest, now wearing the Carter Foundation badge. "I spent 20 years building a reputation for technical excellence," Robert continued. "But I forgot the most important lesson in aviation. Before we are pilots, we are human beings responsible for other lives." At the Foundation's headquarters, Michael watched the lecture via video conference while reviewing reports of ongoing social projects. The Beyond Appearance campaign had transformed into a movement larger than anyone could have predicted. "Sarah," he called, pausing the video. "How's Mrs. Zoe's project going?" Sarah smiled, picking up a folder. "The Seamstress Cooperative already employs 15 women from the community. They just closed a contract to supply uniforms for 3 public schools." "And does that lady still insist on calling me son?" Michael asked, laughing. "You know she does. She says a billionaire who sits on the floor to have coffee with her deserves to be treated like family." Back at the auditorium, Robert was reaching the most difficult moment of his account. "When my daughter stopped talking to me, I realized I had become the kind of person my parents would be ashamed to know." His voice broke. "Laura taught me that respect isn't imposed with authority, it's earned with humility." Laura, who had already heard that story several times during rehearsals at home, was still moved. Her blog about social awareness, inspired by her father's experience, was already reaching thousands of young people. On social networks, the movement was gaining new contours. Executives from large companies were beginning to implement programs inspired by the campaign. A luxury hotel chain had hired residents from local communities for leadership positions. A traditional bank had revolutionized its dress code, allowing employees to dress as they felt comfortable. Peter, after the lecture, shared his own experience with the students. "When I saw Mr. Carter on that plane, I didn't see a billionaire or a beggar. I saw a human being being treated with disrespect," he explained. "True authority isn't in the uniform we wear, but in the choices we make." As he left the auditorium, Robert was surprised by a group of veteran captains. Instead of the hostility he expected, he found recognition. "Your courage in admitting mistakes and working to change them is a lesson for all of us," one of them said, shaking his hand. Michael, who was following everything through Sarah's reports, decided to take the next step. The Carter Foundation would announce a revolutionary program, full scholarships for aviation courses, prioritizing young people from underprivileged communities. "The sky should have no limits," he declared in an announcement video, recorded in the same hangar where it all began. Not social, not economic, not based on appearance. Laura, inspired by her father's transformation and Michael's example, began organizing discussion groups at her school about prejudice and empathy. Her Youth Beyond the Look project quickly spread to other institutions. "You know, Dad," she said one night while helping Robert prepare his next lecture, "sometimes the best lessons come from our biggest mistakes." Robert hugged his daughter, remembering how he had almost lost her admiration. "And sometimes we need a reality check to see who we really are." The movement continued to grow, causing real changes at different levels of society. But perhaps the greatest transformation was happening silently, in the small daily gestures of people who were beginning to see beyond appearances. Sun Square in downtown New York was buzzing with energy on a Saturday morning. Thousands of people wearing T-shirts with the hashtag Beyond Appearances gathered for the first Social Transformation Festival, organized by the Cordero Foundation. Michael circulated discreetly among the booths where different projects supported by the foundation presented their results. In the seamstresses' cooperative tent, Mrs. Zoe proudly displayed the school uniforms produced by her team. "My boy," she called, pulling Michael into the tent, "you need to see what we did with that special fabric you brought." She showed a uniform adapted for children with disabilities, with magnetic closures and touch-sensitive fabrics. On the main stage, Peter was conducting a panel on changes in the corporate environment. Next to him, executives from large companies shared initiatives, inspired by the Beyond Appearances campaign. "Our company completely eliminated the dress code," announced a human resources director. "The result? Productivity increased 30% and the work environment has never been so inclusive." Robert and Lauren coordinated a space dedicated to social aviation. The scholarship program had already selected 50 young people from underprivileged communities for training in different areas of civil aviation. "When I was a child," shared a young scholarship recipient, "I saw planes passing over my community and thought that world would never be for me. Today I'm graduating as an air traffic controller." Mary observed everything from a strategic point, coordinating the event's logistics through her tablet. An alert caught her attention. The hashtag #NorTransformationFestival had reached the top spot in worldwide trending topics. "Mr. Cordero," she called, approaching Michael, "the international press is requesting interviews. The movement has crossed Brazil's borders." Indeed, on screens scattered throughout the square, it was possible to see reports from different countries showing initiatives inspired by the Brazilian campaign. In India, a similar program combated caste discrimination. In France, major luxury brands were revolutionizing their customer service policies. In the center of the square, a photographic exhibition showed life-size portraits of ordinary people with their stories of overcoming prejudice. Among them was Michael's own photo, dirty with grease, next to children in the renovated school in Harlem. "Dad, look!" exclaimed Lauren, pulling Robert by the sleeve. In the next photo was Robert himself, in his new instructor uniform, hugging his daughter. The caption read, "It's never too late to start over." The festival reached its most emotional moment when Michael took the stage for an unscheduled speech. Wearing his characteristic worn-out t-shirt, he took the microphone to warm applause. "3 months ago, an incident on a plane showed us how much prejudice still exists in our society," he began. "But it also showed us something more important, that each person has the power to choose to be part of the change." The cameras focused on the faces in the crowd, capturing tears and smiles. Peter, Robert, Lauren, and so many others who were part of that story were there, witnessing the impact of their individual choices. "The true value of a person is not in the clothes they wear, the position they hold, or the money they possess," Michael continued. "It's in the choices they make, the lives they touch, the difference they make in the world." As he spoke, Mary received more impressive news on her tablet. Companies from various sectors were joining the Beyond Appearances commitment, a pact of inclusive practices and combating prejudice. In the sky, a plane flew low over the square, leaving a colorful trail that formed the phrase, "We are all equal." It was a surprise organized by the new class of scholarship pilots. The Social Transformation Festival wasn't just an event. It was the materialization of a movement that was beginning to change paradigms deeply rooted in society. And this was just the beginning. A tense meeting was taking place in the boardroom of the American Executive Aviation Association. A group of traditionalist businessmen questioned the changes implemented after the Michael Cordero case. "This is going too far," argued Charles Fernandez, owner of an air taxi company. "We can't simply ignore standards established decades ago. Appearance is fundamental in our industry." Robert Mendez, now a diversity consultant for the association, faced his first major resistance. "The standards we defended for so long are the same ones that almost made me assault an innocent man." At Cordero Innovations, Michael faced similar challenges. Some minority shareholders expressed concern about the company's excessive social exposure. During a video conference, one of them was particularly incisive. "Mr. Cordero, your actions are affecting the company's market value. Traditional investors are hesitant. We need to consider a more conventional approach. Michael adjusted his usual worn t-shirt and responded calmly. Our greatest innovation is not in the technology we develop, but in the example we set. The numbers show that our inclusion policy has increased productivity by 45%. Mary projected graphs showing the company's sustainable growth since the beginning of the Beyond Appearances campaign. The stocks had initially fluctuated, but now attracted investors focused on social responsibility. On her blog, Lauren faced trolls attacking her father and the movement. "You're destroying discipline in aviation," said one comment. Instead of feeling discouraged, she turned the attacks into discussion material. "When people resist change so strongly," she wrote in a viral post, "it's because we're touching on long-established privileges." Peter also encountered obstacles in his work at the foundation. During a corporate training, an executive interrupted him. "This is beautiful in theory, but in the real world, appearance sells. That's how it works." "In the real world," Peter replied, "we lose incredible talents because of this thinking. How many programming geniuses haven't we hired because they didn't fit the profile?" The most significant resistance came from a group of digital influencers who launched the Preserving Standards campaign. They argued that Michael's initiative promoted sloppiness and lack of professionalism. The response came from where they least expected. Mrs. Zoe and her seamstresses organized a revolutionary fashion show, Fashion with Purpose. Professional uniforms adapted for different needs and realities, maintaining elegance and functionality. "My son," she said to Michael during the event, "they think appearance is about expensive clothes. Appearance is about dignity, about feeling good about yourself." The fashion show went viral, with major fashion brands seeking partnerships with the cooperative. Resistance generated opportunity, transforming criticism into social innovation. At the aviation school, Robert turned criticism into teaching material. He created a course on ethics and humanization in aviation, making discussion about prejudice and empathy mandatory in the training of new professionals. "If I learned anything from my mistakes," he told the students, "it's that resistance to change comes from fear. Fear of losing privileges, fear of the different, fear of admitting we were wrong." Michael observed all these developments with attention. Each resistance encountered strengthened his conviction that the movement was necessary. In an exclusive interview, he finally responded to critics. "True change disturbs, destabilizes, provokes resistance. But it's precisely these reactions that show we're on the right path. We don't want a superficial revolution of appearances. We want a profound transformation of values." The interview ended with an impactful scene. Michael took the film crew to see a secret project of the foundation, an incubator for social startups, where young people from underprivileged communities develop technological solutions for social problems. The international airport in Dubai was buzzing with the arrival of the American delegation. Michael Cordero, wearing his characteristic worn t-shirt and jeans, led a diverse group. Robert Mendez, Peter, Lauren, and Mrs. Zoe, all invited to the first global forum on social transformation. "I never imagined I'd travel first class," commented Mrs. Zoe, adjusting the colorful turban she had sewn especially for the occasion. "And to think it all started with school uniforms in a community." The contrast between Michael's simplicity and Dubai's ostentatious luxury generated curious looks. But now they were different looks, of recognition and respect. The Beyond Appearances movement had become a global phenomenon. In the main hall of the Burj Al Arab Convention Center, executives of different nationalities gathered to discuss initiatives inspired by the American campaign. An Indian technology company presented its blind hiring program, where candidates were evaluated without photos or personal information. "In just 6 months," explained CEO Priya Sharma, "we increased diversity in our staff by 200%. We discovered extraordinary talents that would have been discarded before due to unconscious biases." Lauren, now a recognized young activist, participated in a panel on social media and behavioral change. Her blog had inspired a global network of young people committed to social transformation. "When my father made that mistake," she shared, "I thought our family was ruined. Today I see it was the beginning of something much bigger than ourselves. Robert, in his presentation on inclusive aviation, surprised everyone by announcing an international partnership. Aviation schools on 5 continents would adopt the scholarship program created by the Cordero Foundation. "The sky has no prejudices," he declared. "Why should we?" Peter was coordinating a workshop on corporate empathy when he received surprising news. Major Middle Eastern airlines, known for their rigid appearance standards, were announcing changes in their policies. Mary, virtually connected from the US, managed the Foundation's international expansion. Projects similar to Mrs. Zoe's cooperative were emerging in underprivileged communities around the world. "Mr. Cordero," she called during a video conference, "the UN wants to establish the International Day of Social Awareness, inspired by our movement." During his keynote speech, Michael maintained the unpretentious style that characterized him. He spoke about how a moment of discrimination turned into a global wave of change. "Prejudice has no nationality," he said, "but neither does compassion, empathy, and the will to change that exists in every human being." The surprise of the event came when local sheiks, known for their attachment to tradition, took the stage wearing movement T-shirts. Dubai wants to be the first city in the world to implement anti-discrimination policies in all sectors, they announced. Mrs. Zoe, in her wise simplicity, stole the show by presenting a collection of professional uniforms that respected different cultures and religions. Her creations united functionality and respect for diversity. "Beautiful clothing isn't expensive," she explained. "It's what makes a person feel dignified." On the last day of the forum, representatives from 50 countries signed the Global Beyond Appearances Commitment, establishing concrete goals to combat discrimination based on appearance. Michael observed everything with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. In his diary he wrote, "Sometimes you need to be unfairly judged to awaken justice in other hearts." On the porch of his simple home in Harlem, Michael had coffee with Mrs. Zoe and her family. The aroma of homemade bread filled the air as they talked about the changes of the last few months. "You know, my son," said Mrs. Zoe, serving more coffee, "the other day my youngest granddaughter said she wants to be an aerospace engineer. Before the movement, she wouldn't even dream of it." The granddaughter in question, Anna Claire, 12, proudly showed her report card. Since she started participating in the Cordero Foundation's mentoring program, her math grades had improved significantly. At the Mendez house, Robert was organizing a family album with Lauren. The old photos showed an always rigid man in an impeccable uniform. The most recent ones revealed someone different, smiling, wearing casual clothes, hugging his daughter. "Dad," said Lauren, stopping at a particular photo, "remember this day?" The image showed Robert teaching math to young aspiring pilots in an underprivileged community. His face showed genuine joy that had never existed in his years as a hardline commander. "How could I forget? It was the first time I understood that true authority comes from respect, not fear." Peter, in his new modest but comfortable apartment, was hosting his parents for a special lunch. His father, a doorman for 30 years in the same luxury building, was especially proud that day. "Son, that building manager who always treated me badly came to apologize yesterday," he said. "He said he saw your lecture on dignity at work and realized how wrong he was." At the Foundation headquarters, Mary was organizing a special surprise. She had gathered testimonials from people impacted by the movement for a commemorative documentary. The stories revealed profound transformations not only in institutions, but mainly in families. An elegant lady, who had previously criticized Michael on the plane, appeared in one of the videos. "My grandson taught me to see beyond appearances. Today I volunteer in a social project and have never been happier." In a downtown cafe, Lauren met with other young activists. Among them was John, son of an important executive, who had abandoned a promising career in finance to work with social inclusion. "After I saw your father turn a mistake into something so positive," he confessed to Lauren, "I realized I could change my story too." Michael, in a rare moment of personal reflection with Mary, shared his own transformations. "You know, I always thought I'd change the world through technology, but I discovered that the greatest innovation is changing hearts." At the cooperative, now installed in a larger space, Mrs. Zoe was training new seamstresses. Among them was the wife of the former commander, who had criticized the movement, now learning a new trade after realizing her life of appearances was empty. "Here no one cares if you wear Gucci or if you made the dress yourself," Mrs. Zoe would say. "What matters is the respect and care you put into what you do." Robert, in a family therapy session he now made a point of maintaining, expressed something profound. "Before, I measured success by my salary and position. Today, I measure success by the difference I make in others' lives." Peter received an unexpected call. His former boss from the airline, who had attended his lecture in Dubai, wanted to implement a mentoring program for low-income employees. "You opened my eyes, Peter," she said. "How many talents did we lose?" "Because of foolish prejudices." At the end of that day, Michael sat down to write in his diary, a habit he had maintained since childhood. His words reflected not only his own changes, but those of everyone around him. True social transformation begins at home, in small daily choices, in moments when we decide to see the other as a human being, not as an appearance. Today, I see that the greatest luxury we can have is the ability to change. Central Park was transforming for the event that would celebrate 1 year of the Beyond Appearances movement. Under the pavilion, Mrs. Zoe coordinated the assembly of the largest inclusive fashion show ever held in the United States, while her cooperative gave the final adjustments to the pieces that would be presented. Each garment tells a story of transformation, she explained to journalists, showing uniforms adapted for different professions and needs. This jumpsuit was inspired by what Mr. Michael wore that day on the plane. In the MoMA auditorium, Robert and Lauren prepared the photographic exhibition Portraits of Change. The images captured memorable moments from the past year. The first group of scholarship recipients graduated from aviation school, Mrs. Zoe receiving an International Social Innovation Award, Peter speaking at the UN. "Dad," called Lauren, stopping in front of a particular photo. It was the image of the former Commander Mendez, rigid and imposing, next to a current one where he smiled teaching young pilots. "Look how your eyes have changed." At the Foundation headquarters, Mary coordinated the final details of the event with an international team. Delegations from 30 countries confirmed their presence, including business leaders who had implemented policies inspired by the American movement. "Is the main auditorium ready?" asked Michael, entering the meeting room still with paint stains on his hands. He came directly from another project in a public school. "Yes, sir," replied Mary, smiling at seeing her boss so characteristically casual. "And this arrived for you." She handed him a golden envelope. Inside was a special invitation from the UN. They wanted to establish the World Beyond Appearances Day on the date of the plane incident. Michael carefully stored the invitation, thoughtful. Peter, now Director of Social Programs at the Foundation, conducted a general rehearsal with the event presenters. Among them was John, the young executive who had abandoned the financial market to dedicate himself to social causes. "Every story we tell tomorrow," Peter guided, "needs to show that true transformation begins with small daily choices." In the space dedicated to aviation, a surprise was being prepared. The first scholarship recipients trained by the program had organized a special tribute, a presentation by the Blue Angels, with veteran and rookie pilots flying together for the first time. Robert, upon learning of the surprise, was moved. "When I was a commander, I thought respect came from authority. Today I know it comes from example. At Mrs. Zoe's cooperative, now a professional training center, seamstresses from different social backgrounds worked side by side. Anna Claire, the granddaughter who dreamed of being an engineer, helped calculating measurements and proportions. "Grandma," she said proudly, "I used geometry to make the pattern perfect." Michael spent the afternoon visiting each space of the event. He stopped especially at the memorial that told the story of the movement, where videos showed touching testimonials from people impacted by the campaign. One was particularly touching. The daughter of the former airline owner told how her father, initially skeptical, had completely transformed his hiring policies after seeing the results of the inclusion program. At the end of the day, everyone gathered for a simple dinner at Mrs. Zoe's house. It was a tradition they had established before each big event, a moment to remember their origins and renew their purposes. "Tomorrow," said Michael, sitting at the simple table with everyone, "we celebrate not just a social movement, but a change. In consciousness, each person here represents thousands of others who have learned to see beyond appearances." Laura, photographing the moment for her blog, captured something special. Her father, the former hardline commander, serving coffee to everyone with a genuine smile on his face. "You know what makes me most proud?" Robert commented, noticing his daughter's photo. "It's not that I changed my story, it's that I helped others change theirs." The evening ended with Mrs. Zoe distributing small pins made by her cooperative, a symbol of the movement that was now recognized worldwide. Each pin had a simple inscription: "Beyond the look, there's a heart." Ibirapuera Park had never witnessed such a unique event. Under the blue São Paulo sky, more than 100,000 people gathered to celebrate the first anniversary of the Beyond Appearances movement. On the main stage, Michael Cordero, wearing his traditional worn T-shirt, observed the diverse crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. "A year ago," he began, his serene voice echoing through the speakers, "a moment of discrimination on a plane showed us how much we still needed to evolve as a society. Today we celebrate not just changes in policies and institutions, but profound transformations in hearts." The smoke squadron cut through the sky at that moment, drawing the phrase, "We are all equal," with colorful smoke. Among the pilots was the first group of scholarship recipients trained by the Foundations program, flying side by side with veterans. On the central lawn, the fashion show organized by Mrs. Zoe presented a revolution in professional attire. Doctors, engineers, executives, and manual laborers showcased uniforms that combined functionality, comfort, and dignity. The big surprise came when Michael walked onto the runway wearing a jumpsuit created by the cooperative, identical to the one he wore on the day of the incident. "Clothes don't make the man," Mrs. Zoe declared into the microphone, "but they can restore his dignity." Robert and Laura coordinated the debate space where transformation stories were shared. A businessman told how he had changed his hiring policies, discovering extraordinary talents in people who would have been previously discarded based on their appearance. Peter, now an international reference in corporate inclusion, presented numbers that proved the movement's impact. Over 1,000 companies had adopted policies against appearance-based discrimination, resulting in an average 40% increase in the diversity of their staff. "But numbers don't tell the whole story," he said. "The real change is in the small daily interactions, in the respect we've learned to have for each other." Marina coordinated the live broadcast of the event to 50 countries, where simultaneous events celebrated the global movement that had been born in Brazil. On the main screen, a mosaic showed celebrations in Dubai, New York, Tokyo, and other metropolises. The most emotional moment came when Michael invited to the stage people who had been on the plane on the day of the incident. The lady who had made prejudiced comments now coordinated a social inclusion project in her luxury neighborhood. The flight attendant who had doubted Michael now directed an empathy training program for aviation professionals. "True transformation," said Michael, "is not just changing behaviors but recognizing our mistakes and working to be better every day." Ana Clara, Mrs. Zoe's granddaughter, took the stage to announce that she had been accepted first place in the Aerospace Engineering College entrance exam. Her choked voice represented thousands of young people who now dared to dream beyond their circumstances. Robert, alongside his daughter, announced the international expansion of the scholarship program. "The sky has no borders, and our dreams shouldn't either." At the event's closing, Michael revealed the biggest surprise. The UN had officially established the World Beyond Appearances Day, transforming the date of the incident into a symbol of social transformation. "This is not the end of a journey," he concluded, "but the beginning of a new era. An era where we don't judge each other by appearance, but by the content of our character and the kindness of our actions." As the sun set over Ibirapuera, thousands of lanterns were lit, creating a sea of light symbolizing hope and transformation. Michael, surrounded by those who had become his family on this journey, Mrs. Zoe, Robert, Laura, Peter, Marina, observed the spectacle with tears in his eyes. "See, my son," whispered Mrs. Zoe, holding his hand. "Sometimes you need to be unfairly judged to teach others not to judge." In the sky, the last lights of the smoke squadron were fading, but their meaning remained. True change begins when we learn to look beyond appearances and see the humanity that exists in each of us.